you're listening to Sustainably Geeky, episode 91. I'm your host, Jennifer, and just as a reminder, you can support the show on buymeacoffee.com/sustainablygeeky if you are so inclined, and of course, subscribe and support us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Sarah Prosser, weaver and CEO of Bioregioning Southeast Ireland. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. I first heard you talk at a local event here in Galway, Ireland, and reached out to you because I found what you talked about very interesting, and I hadn't actually heard of the term bioregioning before. So can you start by telling us a little bit about Bioregioning Southeast Ireland and your role at the organization?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Thanks for having me. I think you introduced me as weaver and CEO of Bioregioning Southeast Ireland, and I think it's that first word, weaver, is my primary job, as I started 4 years ago as a weaver of social and ecological change. So my job was to go in and connect people and projects and their sense of place in ways that perhaps hadn't been sort of woven together before. And then since then, the CEO part has been because 2 years ago we spun out from our original home of a GIY in Southeast Ireland and have set up our own independent non-profit organisation called Bioregional Weaving Alliance Ireland. So now I'm the CEO of that. So yep, it's an organisation that's been going for 4 years, but existing for 2 as an independent entity. And our overall mission is to really that connecting of people and place for universal thriving, so that both nature and humans and the communities within that can live healthy and thriving lives going into the future.
Yeah, what a great goal. And I know we'll get into some examples of how you do that later, but it is a really cool concept and something that I was kind of relieved to hear about because it's a little bit different and the local focus, is very interesting. So I know that your organization works with others both locally and internationally. So can you talk about how you work with these organizations, or I guess if you're part of a larger international movement?
Sure, you're right. It is a really cool job. I forgot to say that part as well. It's actually a brilliant job. And to be able to give them the privilege to come in and work with these kind of things is quite unique. And I think watching the difference it can make has been one of the really sort of joyous things about it. I started by applying for this weaver position as part of an international network called the Bioregional Weaving Lab Collective, which was crossing 8 countries in Europe. It was a new idea, and 2 people from Ireland had been involved in setting that up. So Brendan Dunford and Mick Kelly, who were both Ashoka Fellows. And Ashoka is an organisation that works for large-scale social change. And they'd come together with Common Land, which is a NGO in the Netherlands, who's been working with large-scale landscape transformation. And to have this large-scale ambitious social change and this large-scale ambitious landscape change brought together was how the Bioregional Weaving Lab Collective started. Since then, we stepped a little bit back from the core group of that and are now more focused on networks along the Atlantic Isles. So part of a Common Land cluster across Ireland and the UK. So we're now part of a learning network with people in Scotland and Wales and Devon and England, as well as a community of practice working on sort of looking at new finance flows. We call it how do we flow finance into bioregions and then somehow orchestrate it out into making change in a way that relates to what's happening on the ground. So those are the sort of international networks, but there's been a sort of resurgence in interest in bioregioning, I think, across many continents. So this is just us focusing now more on our Atlantic home, but we know that there's lots going on in North America, Canada, across South America, and more in all sorts of areas across the world. So it's quite inspiring to see how it is fractally appearing all over the world as a response to some of the polycrises that we're finding ourselves in now.
Yeah, and before we go on, I think it's important that we define what a bioregion is. So can you explain that to our listeners?
That question. What is a bioregion? So there's not sort of one definition, but it's bio means life and region means large scale area. So it's really, how do we look at a sort of new container, a new area that's not defined by political boundaries, but defined by nature. So if we look at the geology and how that's given rise to our landscapes and our watersheds, and we say, you know, what are the living systems and how can we honor them to be not cut in half by a boundary that happens to cross a river, or, you know. So it tends to be a watershed kind of scale. For instance, in Southeast Ireland, we're working in an area that would cover 5 really big rivers, the Three Sisters, as they're called, the Blackwater, and some of the coastal rivers, all coming together. So it's quite a large scale. I mean, it's many hundreds of thousands of acres, all coming together and saying, while we're honouring the joined upness of those natural systems, we're also looking at the relationship of people held by that system. So it's communities held by nature in a sort of joined up and connected way. And this really gives us a context that means that we can honour. So, for example, in Ireland, the southeast is very different than the northwest in terms of some of the challenges to do with water quality or soil health. And it's very different because it has a different soil structure, because it has a different agricultural tradition. The responses that we should be looking for are also different. And so it's sort of is a way of bringing people together at the largest scale of relationship. So rather than saying, let's work by village, you're bringing it in at a large scale that also honours those living systems in ecology, but also is large enough to say that, well, you know, if something's happening in the uplands, it's connected to what's happening at the end of the river as well. So flooding in a city, you know, has to be connected to what's happening right up at the source of the rivers, and somehow connecting people along that same ecosystem will make sense that we can all be working towards a common desire to change that in a positive way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, a couple of things that struck me when I heard of this concept is, one, you're working with nature kind of setting the boundaries rather than humans, because rivers, mountains, whatever, don't recognize our political borders. They're arbitrary when it comes to the landscape. So when we try to impose these human-made borders to the world, it's just kind of silly and a futile attempt sometimes. So this is a way to kind of look at it more holistically. And then also, just in general, you know, a lot of nature restoration projects treat nature as separate from humans, like the human element isn't involved or included as much. So this bioregioning approach seems to see human systems and cultures as not just a part of, but necessary to the functioning of nature. Is that accurate, I guess? And then if so, like, why is that important in your opinion?
I think that is accurate, and I think it's just like having these new spaces for just a little bit of reference to the sort of madness of political boundaries sometimes, is also that if you're working within political boundaries, it also somehow gives a power imbalance, where the people defining the political boundaries have an extra level of power to decide what happens within those containers. And I think these bioregional containers is a way also of like unleashing new kinds of conversations that small groups of people can make a difference, and they can organize to club together to say, we care about our nature, we care about our thriving, we care about our health, and how can we contribute, and the political people, you know, support us rather than us being consultants for a political decision to be made on our behalf. So I just think that power element is also important to bring in. But coming back to your second point there, the thing about nature and people in contact with each other, and I think it is that connection. How connected are we with nature? But then also, how connected is nature with us? And we did a wonderful project with 4 artists about bioregional mapping, or deep mapping, or mapping. Catherine Barron was one of the artists, and that's her approach. And we looked at both how people connect to nature. So if you weren't going to use your air code, your postcode of, where do you live, and you were going to describe to someone, how do I live, where do I live in nature? How ready are we to say, I live between, the hills, the Comoray Hills and the Tremor Coast? Or do we know the name of our rivers? Do we know the names of our local landscape features to be able to actually even describe where we live? And it's a really interesting challenge. And then we also turned it on its head and said, how would nature describe the humans living in their the natural containers? And if you were nature looking at this person living here, what would you say about that person? And would you be saying, you're extracting things from me, you're de-nourishing, what's the opposite of nourishment? Me, like you're taking things away from me, and we're not living in harmony. And I think bringing in that voice of nature and bringing in the voice of the bioregion can really highlight, what we're doing to nature, rather than always expecting humans to say, oh, it's very bad to, drive over there or do different things. It's this balance of saying, let's think really joined up about what we're doing, with nature always there, but very much with humans in harmony with it.
Yeah, something we've really gotten away from, unfortunately, and we need to get back to, I think, as a society, humans in general. I know that part of the work you do revolves around the 4 returns framework for landscape restoration. So can you explain what that is and how it's applied?
Yeah, so this is it's a framework that was developed through Common Land, working with land stewards and people trying to regenerate and protect landscapes around the world. They're working in Australia, Canada, Australia, India, South Africa, names wrong here. And Common Land have realised that looking at these large-scale landscapes where we have seen regeneration and restoration successfully happen across huge areas, we're looking at the return of natural capital. We're looking at the return of social capital, so meaningful jobs coming back to these areas. We're looking at a return of finance flows into these areas, so we can't do it without having sustainable finance. But that without a return of motivation and inspiration, none of these things are going to happen. So it's really saying, how can we invest in people to be inspired to work with the other 3 legs of sustainability that maybe we're more familiar with? So people talk about social, financial, and environmental sustainability, but we also need a sustained motivation and inspiration to be working with. And if we invested in that side of things, maybe the other 3 would come more naturally. But you see an awful lot of siloed finance and siloed support of the other 3 without really thinking about where does motivation and inspiration come from. So those are the 4 returns that we think, from a degraded landscape, you need to make 4 kinds of capital value, or 4 kinds of return that would include inspiration as well as social, financial, and environmental.
Yeah, and what are some examples of successfully using this approach, whether locally or around the world, like you said?
Well, locally, I think there's sort of fundamental level in terms of bringing in new language, and so if we brought in the fact that we're even talking about the 4 returns, coming into a landscape and sensing into the landscape, as we say, building trust and visiting some of the change makers in the landscape. How do they respond to this language? And I think what's been one of the biggest surprises is how much it resonates to use the kind of words like 4 returns. They want to think holistically, and this gives a framework. Then we can say, oh, I'm bringing back a bit of nature here and inspiration through this, and somebody else can say social here and financial there, and it gives us a way of like aggregating all the different kinds of impact into a very simple common narrative. And that means that we can put together a really quite complex portfolio of different projects happening all over the bioregion. They've got this common way of talking and noticing change, so that we can say, if you really want to make the whole of the landscape restore and regenerate, we're going to have to start investing and supporting very different kinds of projects. So some examples would be, one of them is what we call Our Farm. Our Farm at Bushy Park is the first Our Farm that started in the bioregion, but our ambition is that we would have Our Farm in lots of different places. And the idea is that local residents have access to local nutritious food, but that it's on a land that is leased through a co-op that they have a share in. So they own this farm, but it's rented from a local farmer, the land, and that local farmer has a guaranteed income and a guaranteed pension, insurance, all these things that in these days of such sort of risk and the fluctuation of prices and weather and everything else is something that many farmers, and especially small scale farmers, really struggle to be able to live sustainably with. So this model of Our Farm, where you buy a share and that gives you the capital up front, but you also pay for weekly boxes. So it's not a sort of dependent on people staying in a box scheme. It's got built in all sorts of stability, so that we have access to food system that can mean healthy lifestyles for everyone involved, and healthy soils as well. So that Our Farm is just, it had a year of practice. It's been very much inspired by a model in the Netherlands called the Herenboeren model. But we've adapted it slightly to the Irish setting, but taken a lot of lessons from the Netherlands. And this year we're just literally now signing the contracts with 30 families who have signed up and will be accessing their food from this farm, which is, I should say, is diverse as well. It's not just one crop or one kind of thing. It will have both horticulture and livestock on it. So there's a lot of delight and inspiration, but it's also got a social side, because people can come and volunteer if they want to, and it's like lots of people coming and saying how much it means to them. It's also got the environmental returns, bringing back no chemical farming into this part of East Cork, where we are in this case. And that, so we've got inspiration, social, nature, and financial. It's all of it's built in to be a for return kind of farm. So that'd just be one example. So other examples are we're working with, we heard from, what we do is we sort of listen what could make a difference. And there's a lot of movement from older people who want to take more responsibility for being both good ancestors, but also initiating change rather than being passive citizens. So this unleashing the social capital of the third age is another example. And we've just finished a festival called Seasons of Change, where we were looking at older people and how they access local nutritious food. Is it access? Is it the price? Or is it sort of their knowledge and eco-literacy, we sometimes call it, that's sort of stopping or they're putting barriers in the way of older people accessing local food. So we did a festival there and used nutrition vouchers that was actually helping subsidize access to locally grown food in locally healthy soils, and seeing, is it the price difference? We took bus trips to local food producers, and we had culture and music and all sorts of things around it to say, what is it that could drive this amazing amount of, there's 22,000 people in our bioregion over the age of 65. It's a powerful force if you can unleash it to make change, So those are two examples. We've got a portfolio of 14 different kind of things going on, and it gets a bit complicated. But I think what the joy of it is that in that portfolio, you're being honest to the entanglement of all these different things going on. Because if you just come in and say, we're only going to support local farms or only going to support older people, then we're not recognizing that they're intrinsically related. And we have to look at complexity as a real part of our landscapes, rather than these silos of of change.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you said this was a newer organization when you joined it. How challenging was it to bring people together when you were new? You know, you had to kind of prove yourself and get to know the community first. And I can imagine, you know, especially with farmers who have, there's not a lot of room for error, you know, like the margins are very small. They can't risk big changes a lot of times. And if you're coming in with a new idea or something you're asking them to start with, I guess, how did you build that trust up and get people on board?
I think that the word trust is incredibly important. And I think, you know, there's no way I could have turned up. I'm Scottish originally, been living in Norway for many years. And I'm quite a sort of neutral person arriving, saying, you know, bringing in these words like bioregioning and weaving. And obviously, the first thing to do is to visit the people who are most, we sometimes say furthest along their change maker journey. I know it's an awful expression, but it's how people that are already the pioneers, they're out there, they're wanting to make change. And to approach them and say, can I come and learn, and be very open about the learning. I'm listening, I'm learning. And I visit them and I walk their landscapes and I listen to them. And from that, begin to build individual trust. And then they spread by just by talking to other people, that this is actually something that could be quite interesting. And then we invite people into multi-stakeholder gatherings where they meet new people and realize that they're part of something bigger, this zooming out perspective, where they can zoom out and see they're not just one farmer trying to do something different, but they're part of something that relies on the consumers and the decision makers and the teachers and everybody. And these multi-stakeholder settings is something that where they're all being honored for their own inputs, but with a collective direction, an intent of doing deep-rooted systemic change, where everyone is needed to do their own part, gives them a sense of connectedness and part of being something bigger, but in being in a safe space of belonging where they can talk about this without being put down by somebody who says, oh, but it's all for, you know, it isn't economically viable, or it isn't this, or it isn't that. You know, it's a place where we're looking for building new systems that do work. And I think it's almost like a relief to find a space that is listening to those kind of people. And then we're trying to sort of build that system, and other movers, the second movers, come behind, you know. So we're not trying to fight the current system of the supermarkets and the very commercial agribusinesses. We're trying to show that another way really is viable and really is possible when you work together. And some of the stuff we do is to bring people into networks and look at what's missing in terms of infrastructure. So we have basic bioregional infrastructure grants we can give, or we've just started exploring basic income. We've given out the first one as a bioregional basic income, and saying, you know, if you had this for 3 years, what does it unleash in terms of being able to take those risks? So it comes back to the sort of bioregional finance is a big part of what we do, is trying to bring in new flows of money that can support in new ways, and build that system and show that things are possible. And I haven't talked about where our funding comes from, actually, because maybe it's worth saying that it's very much from three really progressive philanthropies, philanthropy organizations and foundations, one Irish, one Netherlands, and one in the US at the moment. And they're all sort of saying, you know, go try and do something different. We're quite hands-off. It's trust-based philanthropy, which means that we can work with trust-based financing of these pioneers that we find. So we're experimenting with different kinds of financial support, as well as networks of support and knowledge exchange. And then we also apply for grants through, project-based funding. We've had some through the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine and their deep demonstration project. We worked with the Future of Dairy. We've worked with the Geological Society to make big maps. We have different things. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the funding thing is so important. I mean, I've worked in the nonprofit sector, but also just talking to people who say like getting funding is made even more stressful when you have to have all of this reporting attached to it. And I understand to an extent they want accountability for where the money's going, but when you make it so cumbersome to do that work that all they're thinking about is the reporting side of it, or they're being micromanaged, it's very difficult to actually do the work. So the fact that you're getting funding that's hands off, as you say, and letting you do the work and trusting you has to be such a relief to you. And then you can turn around and kind of do the same for local organizations and farmers. And yeah, that's the kind of progressive funding I think we need more of in the world in general. But
it's amazing how I don't know that the weight it takes off your shoulders just to know that you're trusted, and some of the people that we pass it on to are just like going, are you sure you don't want to know? This is a grant. They're not big grants, but they're enough just to say, we have 3 levels of grants. We go sort of catalyst grants and €1,000. The next one's a do it grant of 8,000. Then we're talking about 17,000 for basic incomes for 3 years or a piece of infrastructure that's missing. But it's just being able to, like the Our Farm example that I was talking about, we were able to give a do it grant to them, and that meant that they could go out and buy fence posts and seeds and get the compost in and get things going, without before they learn by doing. So everything they learned that first year was just by doing it, and now they're ready to set up the payment scheme that means they can be financially sustainable, and we can take a different role. So this year we're fiscally hosting them. We're helping, realize that they haven't yet set up their formal cooperative, but in 2 years' time there will be a formal cooperative. So it's like having the right kind of supports around you as you go. And the example that they always use is like when the crows came and ate all their seedlings, the first night. You're not a lonely farmer on a farm looking out at your empty field. You put it in your WhatsApp group and suddenly you've got everybody down putting out nets. You've got the support everywhere. It's like, how do you make farming part of the whole cultural movement that people want to be part of? And this is fun to get involved with. And this is where we have our quality of life, both the farmers and the people involved. So there's some lovely stories to come out.
I think people in general are craving a return to connecting with nature, living closer to nature. I mean, as we become more urbanized, you see people, they don't know where to start. They just, anytime they're able to get out in nature, they just thrive. And like, I'm in a group locally that volunteers at a local park, but we've also partnered with a local farmer where we've gone out a few times in the last year to pick blueberries, to help plant moss in the bog, and doing all these cool things. And you get people coming from the city to do this manual labor, and they just love it. Like, I've gone 4 or 5 times because I can't get enough of it. So yeah, there is that community that wants this, and I think capitalizing on that to help the farmer, and then in turn it helps give them that sense of belonging. And yeah, it's just great.
It is, and I think you're right. I think there is a real yearning for that now, and I think access to nature is actually quite hard in Ireland, surprisingly. So I think that access to nature through being in contact with your food system and helping biodiversity through practical measures is actually a very meaningful thing to do at the same time as having access to nature. So I think it's a win-win kind of experience.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you guys support locals, not just financially, but you're also bringing people together, facilitating conversations, not just coming in saying, we're the experts, here's what you should do, but listening and kind of coordinating their ideas and guiding, people together rather than a top-down approach.
Yeah, totally. And we try and say we're there as a support, to whatever is emerging from the bioregion. We'll listen, and if that's what's emerging, then that's what's the lived experiences of the people in the bioregion are the ones that should be supported, because they're the ones that are going to bring other people with them and the communities with them. So we're just here to look for patterns within that, to join dots, and to do. I think there's been so much. There's been big advances, maybe we always knew, about how to bring people together what kind of tools you can use, what kind of methodologies and workshops and things like that. So there's a lot of expertise on curating, on facilitating, on recording, but not on the actual doing so much as, we're there to sort of package it into something that could actually have a longevity to it and make the value be a positive direction, and perhaps avoid some of the pitfalls that, if they're not supported in the right way, are a common barriers to further progress. So how can we avoid conflict and look for common ground? How can we do visioning exercises? How can we co-write visions of what we want, so that we can all sign up to that, and then that alignment is already there at the beginning of the project, and you can bring a movement behind you. So something we did quite early on was write the Bioregion's food manifesto. And that was a really powerful day, bringing about 40 people together and really different backgrounds, farmers and teachers and decision makers and all sorts. And they each expressed what they know from their own lives and what they would like to see. And we co-wrote, used those words and put it into a manifesto that you can listen to online. And it's one of the most powerful pieces of text. I just love it. I can listen to it again and again, because it's their voices saying, we want this as, food as community core and all sorts of. I'm not going to try and quote it, but I would encourage everyone listening to go and find that food manifesto and for the bioregion and listen to it, because it's all those words came from the people. And once you've got that ready, you can then say, right, this is what we're working for. This is our North Star. And we just had another lovely event a few weeks ago where we brought together grain, meat, horticulture, and dairy people. Again, multi-stakeholder, and they all looking at, what kind of networks and new cooperatives do they want to see in the Southeast, so that they can support each other and be in solidarity with each other and build up local infrastructure we need to be able to let more people work in this kind of way. And again, by listening to their individual words, we've been able to put together some common principles and say, these are what we stand by, and these are the ideas of how we can take that to action. So those are the kind of curating and gathering kind of roles that we can take. And I think that is what makes the enabling conditions for everything that's moving in that direction to thrive together. So,
yeah, very cool. So having been in the southeast of Ireland doing this work for a couple years now, what do you see for the future of bioregioning in Ireland? Are there plans for similar organizations in the island? Personally, selfishly, I'd love to see something like this in this area. And I know we actually met at a talk where you talked about what it could look like for our the Corrib River catchment, I think, applied locally. So I guess, are there talks of maybe expanding it in Ireland or even, around the world? I know you said there's already places, but is it growing? Is the movement growing?
Yeah. In Ireland, I think, when I first started talking about bioregions, there was it does take time for the words to sort of sink in, and they are quite difficult to define. But when you actually realize what sense it makes to have a container where things can layer within context and communities, it just is just common sense that you would work like this, So I think it has found a space in Ireland, and we're now working with different groups around Ireland. The Southwest has been quite active. So the Southwest bioregion would go all the way from Cork City and all the way out to Dingle Peninsula, that whole area down there. And we've had various meetings, both online and in Cork. And they are now beginning they had a meeting just last week and are going to say they're going to start doing some mapping of what's out there as their first stage of things. And that, that's a completely different setting than the Southeast. They've got 50 organisations already super keen. Cork City Council are there and the food policy, and you've got the people out in the Cork, everybody's going, yes, we want to do it. And it's so different in the southeast, where we don't have that sort of civil society engagement in the same way. We see that our northern landscape, as we call it, up in the Three Sisters, they've just putting out saying that they want to start building up the River Trust collaboration more formally, and I think that'll really help building on the amazing work of the Norvision up there, and how can that bring in a catchment-based container for change. Like you say, I was up in Galway, and it was a really inspirational day up there. There's so much good stuff going on. The Corrib catchment would just be one coming down, but the bioregion would actually go right the way around Galway Bay. And that could be really good fun to do. Then there's Lough Neagh, obviously in Northern Ireland, has been in the news a lot in terms of its problems with the blue-green algae and pollution and runoff, and how do we bring people together around that. Now, Common Land, our backbone organisation, who's one of our funders, they've been working a lot up there and looking at the catchment of Lough Neagh as a bioregion, which is interesting. And then we've got some other people over in North Wicklow looking at the whole East Coast. So on the 10th of April, we're going to have our first bioregioning across Ireland event. So we're trying to bring people together on the 10th of April and say, can we build a sort of learning platform? So rather than us trying to lead this, because we do see that other organizations are beginning to refer to bioregions, it is a sort of fractal thing that comes up. So how could we have a common learning platform? And then we have Life's Too Good is one of our funders, and they've been giving us some small seed funding to see if we can start spreading the knowledge and bringing in other areas. So I think we're just on the cusp of saying, yes, we're going to see this much more concrete coming out over, I would say, over the next year in Ireland, definitely. Yeah.
Well, that's great. You guys are pioneering and kind of showing what can be done in Ireland and ideally, anywhere in the world. And on that note, my next question was going to be advice you'd give people who are interested in applying these principles in their own bioregion, or maybe even starting a similar type organization.
So, I mean, yeah, obviously the first thing to do is to look out and see who's out there already. There's sometimes, like the people we work with in Scotland, the bioregioning Tayside are very like us, bioregioning Southeast Ireland. We have very similar names, but it might be going under a slightly different name. So look for the River Trusts. The Fourth River Trusts Trust in Scotland is doing amazing work and moving up to a landscape scale at which bioregions come in. So I think it's the first thing you do is look for who's working in these ways, and are there networks to join. But other people are setting up, small groups to start looking at what would it mean to learn and join learning platforms. Depends. There are some quite concrete courses over in other continents, but also in the UK. There's not so many learning opportunities in Ireland yet, but we're also talking about whether we could set up more formal learning modules through local universities, as well as the informal learning platforms that we'll be setting up through the kind of event we're doing on the 10th of April, but it's what we'll call just Bioregioning Ireland. And our organisation was set up to be an umbrella kind of organisation to spread that learning across the whole island. So I think, all you can do is think about what are you passionate about, and then try and come in from that angle, because I think what bioregioning is all about is that you shouldn't be doing something that you're not already passionate for. It's called collective impact, because we're all making our impact, and it's not necessarily about collaborating with other people, but about feeling you're part of a direction, of a movement in the same direction that can be joined up. So first of all, find out what your nearest river is, what is your bioregional address, and then think, okay, who else is working in this catchment, and how could I contribute through my own passions and interests in a joined up way. So maybe could I also just say, actually, in terms of learning, and maybe it's something that's also coming up, but I think both Bioregioning Tayside and the Bioregional Learning Centre in Devon have both got very good websites and resources that if you want to sort of see the kind of projects, because it can be artistic, it can be nature restoration, it could be water quality, citizen science, teaching. They're so broad that there's room for everybody to feel that they can contribute.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions is what are some resources you'd share with listeners who want to learn more about bioregioning in general, or just anything that you think is impactful for this kind of work?
So I think I think it's slightly different in every bioregion. We all do it slightly differently, and of course, because we're all humans and lead in different ways. So even if it's collective, I'm really quite pragmatic and want to sort of see new ideas sprout, like the Our Farm, or how can we get things going and how can we support them, to be really quite pragmatic. Other bioregions are coming in from a more sort of like connected to the land and a more spiritual side of it, I suppose. So you might find very different things as you start looking around. I would say that, just to repeat, I suppose the two I just quoted, which are part of our UK and Ireland networks that we're part of, would be the Bioregional Learning Centre in Devon, which is bioregion.org.uk, and the one up in Tayside is bioregioning tayside.scot. And once you start digging down into these kind of organisations, you'll find lots of resources and links and podcasts and
Perfect. I know we've gone over a lot of information. Is there anything else you'd want to cover before we move on?
The one thing I'm more and more, I suppose, even more passionate about is land. I think, this access to land and what we're doing with our land is something that land use, but also land ownership, and how do we keep that within a way that people can access it for the right reasons. It's something that we should perhaps be bringing up more and more. There's an idea to set up a bioregional observatory. So you're actually looking for long-term trends in land use, in land ownership, in the biodiversity of that land, the choice of why do people choose to do this with their land. So that inspirational part, and I just think if we think that we can do all this without remembering that all that matters is land, it's a fundamental worry that we could lose it very fast by being short-term, directed into selling or leasing for highest prices, or being told that this, for the next 10 or 20 years might work. We have to think in generations and have to think about options for agricultural land trusts or community land trusts or other ways of keeping land in a controlled container, where we can make sure that people who want to do things that are regenerative rather than extractive can actually do it.
Yeah, humans can be very short-sighted, unfortunately, and just think about the immediate needs, especially with land. Like one of our more recent shows talks about conservation easements, which aren't as prevalent in Ireland, and maybe they're a bit more in the UK, but that's essentially protecting private land development rights, buying those rights off the landowners so that they're basically protected in perpetuity, and the land certain development can't happen on the land. It's essentially frozen the way it is, which, depending on the pressures around it, can be especially helpful if it's, under pressure of development from builders or whatever. But yeah, definitely we need to be thinking more about different ways of protecting land and keeping it from being gobbled up and not used for the best purpose.
And done in a holistic way. And I think that's why the container of the bioregion is quite, because that holistic thing is saying people do need to live there. We do need to make these living landscapes. We need to have ways of stewarding that land that makes sense downstream, upstream, with people looking for housing, looking for jobs. So it's all got to be, but there are ways of bringing people together and taking those decisions in a community-led, community-rooted, contextual way, rather than it being a sort of external person coming in and saying this land will be done, done this, or someone coming in from big, rich corporate and saying, we're going to buy this up and do this with it. You know, there are ways of joining together for the long-term common thriving. And I think this commonage side of things is so important to link back to the intangible cultural side of things, and how can we make sure that our landscapes are going to still resonate with that going forward. And it's a very quick route to losing control of it. So I just hope that we manage to hold on to that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this information and teaching us about bioregioning. I guess we will go ahead and move on to our green life hack portion of the show. And this is just where we share one thing each that listeners can do to live more sustainably. So Sarah, would you like to start us out with a green life hack?
It's got to be my electric bike. I don't have a car. I cycle everywhere. It is such fun. I want to bring the joy back to cycling. I think people talk about it as a scary thing. We've got to reclaim the lanes. We've got to just arrive at work with that grin across our faces like I do when I cycle up from Tremor, see the comers come through all the gorse and everything. It's just such fun. So I would like everybody that hasn't got an electric bike, speak to a friend and just try it, or go into a bike shop and say, can I just try one? Put it on turbo, put it on the top level all the time, and go and have a go, because it's not as scary and it's not as difficult, and it's such fun. So I would love everybody to get into electric biking, really. and push bikes, of course. But
yeah, that's a great one. Mine is more focused on the household. I was doing laundry earlier and thinking this would be a good green life hack, just rethinking how we do our laundry, because I think a lot of folks are used to just buying the detergent in the big plastic jugs and hopefully recycling those when they're done. But that creates a lot of waste. And then sometimes, like in the States, we have the big dryers and people will use lint dryer sheets, and then that's waste. So I would say think about maybe getting dryer balls if you do use a dryer, or switching to a clothes drying rack, which is what most people do in Europe, especially in countries where the dryers are useless. And when it comes to washing, think about, can I switch my detergent, or can I use something less abrasive or whatever? Like I use an eco egg, which is it is a plastic egg, but it's reusable, and you put pellets in and it works for like 50 washes or something. Some people use strips, some people make their own. So yeah, just kind of rethinking how we wash our clothes, and maybe not washing them as often if they don't need it, to keep the clothes in better shape for longer. The more we wash it, the more it wears them down, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my challenge to folks, is to just evaluate how you do laundry and maybe change a few things if you're able to. Not the most exciting thing, but hey, we've all got to do it. So, well, again, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell folks where we can find you online?
Bioregion.ie is our work, or else connect with me directly through LinkedIn. I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
Okay, and I'm guessing you're on all the socials as well, the Bioregion Southeast Ireland?
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn and Instagram. We have room for improvement on both, but yes, we are there, and that is where you'll find us. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll link to all this, everything we've mentioned in the show notes, and you can find the show. You can find me personally on Instagram, Blue Sky at Het's Gonna Be Me, and you can find the show itself on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and YouTube at Sustainably Geeky, and then anywhere you listen to podcasts, of course. Please like, review, rate, whatever it lets you do. And again, you can support the show on buymeacoffee.com/sustainablygeeky. For everyone listening, have a great rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you.